Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host Wilfred Riley. And joining us this week, we have a couple of our a regular co-host and a previous guest. We have Kathy Griffin's regular opening act, Lou Perez.
I made that request. I put it out into the universe.
I just assumed it was real. Right?
Hopefully she'll take me on, man. That'd be great.
And David Sypher, our resident Black Republican. David and Lou, welcome to the show.
All right.
So this is the first day of Black History Month. And as per usual, since Twitter, now I guess that's another thing. These we can talk about where these debates and these arguments come from, both culturally and why they happen so often. I think it's just the advent of social media and being able to talk about it all the time. So we're getting into not even 28, it's a leap year. So we get 29 days of arguing about Black history, it's racist and whether we should cover it and all that nonsense. So I wanted to talk about it, talk about what we should be celebrating, what we should not, how we do it, and all those things from our diverse panel. And I guess we'll open it up with the first shot across the bow. Matt Walsh's tweet about there not being a Black culture. Will responded. And I think I know where everybody's going to go with. But before we get into whether he's right or wrong, he's wrong, and what Black culture is, I guess the larger question is, why do you all think, I guess I'll go Will first. Why do you think everyone feels the need to express their views about these topics? Like, why do they have to say that this is a bad holiday, a good holiday? We shouldn't be celebrating this, or we should. Why is it such an important thing for them?
Because we're Americans, God damn it. I mean, this is something that I've been talking about a couple times today. So one of the things I said, I've been in a lot of exec type meetings today, so that means there's a lot of time I could probably don't want to say that it means there's a lot of time I could spend online, but I had some free minutes. And like one of the things I said, there was another debate that was going on about like gender surgeries for kids. Mm-hmm. And a feminist woman asked, well, if you would ban these gender surgeries for kids, are you willing right now to ban, breast augmentation and like labioplasties and all this other stuff that I didn't know was legal for young girls? And my response was, hell yeah. Obviously, I think that's crazy. I can't believe you can do that. And women started responding and saying, well, you're a man. What do you have to say about this? And it was like, well, I mean, I expect to be a father of daughters. All my partners are going to be women. Like any citizen can say something about anything. So similarly, I mean, when you talk about Matt, who I generally like, or all these other guys seeing, like Google changing the background to kente cloth and all this as Black History Month starts. I mean, people are going to weigh in and say, I think this is silly. I don't think there's a unified Black culture. Everyone has a right to do that. My response was just, I don't think that's true. I think that's a dumb statement. That's like saying there's no Appalachian culture or something like that.
Right.
Even the idea that there's American culture, last thing. But if you travel overseas and you've got, you're a little chubby, muscular, you got the flag on your book bag, you're a loud talker. I mean, like there's certain things that will distinguish you as an American probably 90% of the time. So you can tell who someone is, what background someone is from most of the time. Even experiencing racism historically has been a part of Black culture.
Right. Lou, before I got to go to David last, because Dave's going to rip me apart and he's going to go for 20 minutes, so he gets to go last. Obviously, you agree with that. That was so sensible. It'd be kind of hard not to agree with that. But you started to allude to, before I told you all, I don't want to hear it until we start recording. You started to allude to what my point is about this on the one hand. I'll get to that secondly. But first, I want to talk, I know Dave is going to talk about this in the sense of trying to probe the minds of what they try to gain from it. I think Dave overthinks it. I think he thinks that he will speak for himself in a moment, but I think he thinks that everything, that it has an ulterior motive, or they're trying to win some great political battle, or I don't think they're thinking that deep. I think, tell me what you think. I think it's a lot more surface reasons for it.
I think that for the past few years, at least let's just say the past few years, conservatives, especially white conservatives, have seen a lot of criticism of like quote unquote whiteness and that sort of thing. So anytime there's something that could be, on the other side of that, blackness or black in particular, I think it actually triggers a lot of people. And I know it's one of my big triggers too. Like anytime that I see somebody going after someone on the basis of race, like, oh, white people should shut the fuck up on this, like this. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I'm going to talk now because I'm being told to shut up.
Right.
So I think there's something to that, and I think what happens a lot is I think the sensitivity levels are turned up way too high.
Right.
Where I think people are a lot quicker to say things like what Matt Walsh said, because when I think about black culture, I really do view it as American culture. I believe it as probably one of the biggest exports that we have, whether it's music in particular. I mean the impact that that black music has had on the United States and in the world, right? And that's not to say that there isn't this commingling of in jazz with Jews and blacks and all that, but to say that those aspects aren't cultural, I think is silly.
Right. David?
Oh, I thought you was gonna go ahead of me. I thought you were saving me for last.
No. I will wait for you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I will say this. I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna piggyback off of Lou. I would agree with the fact that over the last few years, there have been within conservative circles a big culture war, right? So there's always an avenue for you to win the culture war, and even in that Twitter comment, he was actually engaging in a sort of culture war, because I think the person he responded to, he was trying to point them out because they were saying that there's black culture, but because of racism and all that, white culture doesn't exist. So it was his attempt, I guess, to once again get involved in the culture war. But sometimes it's a losing battle to get involved in that, because you end up actually betraying your conservative values. Because the last episode I was on, you, me, Will, we spoke about the cultural issues in the black community. And anytime we speak about cultural issues in the black community, any conservative would agree. Yeah, we need better marriages. That's the problem. Police brutality, this, that, and the third. So on one hand, you can't, when it's convenient for you, you can't say, yeah, black culture exists because you see the problems. And then on the other hand, say, no, black culture doesn't exist. You have to pick a lane. Either you're going to use black culture to have a problem with this, or you're going to say black culture doesn't exist. It either exists or it doesn't. Now, in my case, I believe that every ethnic group has a cultural story where it doesn't only pertain to whites, right? It's how ethnic groups, how they traditionally express themselves. Like Will said, there's an Appalachian culture, right? There's something that distinguishes them. It doesn't have to be a big distinguisher. It could be maybe this group wears a certain color. Maybe they eat a certain cuisine, or they have a certain oral history. They have this, they have that, just something that tells their experience on this planet. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but everybody would generally agree that cultural is it's a reality. It's a reality. So that's my take on it.
Well, for those who will only listen to this, I will let you know that I was smiling while Dave was talking, because I'm thinking in my head, how much trouble do I want to get in? Not that I really care what people think, but part of the reason I get I think Lou was right about why they do it. The only reason I question it is I'm like, I just don't get it. I don't understand why. You don't gain anything out of it. I guess it's cathartic and they just feel better when they do it. But I'm like there's so many, I used to always joking, but it was true, that I delete more tweets than I send. It's because half the time I'm like, is it even worth arguing with some idiot about this who's not going to has no nuance, and they're going to say, all right, you all know this, to it, Will, with the strongest Twitter game here, that you'll say something and they'll say you're saying something else. I was like, I don't have time for all that, But that said, I don't disagree with what any of you said, but it kind of leads to the other parts of it, in the sense that you have to ask, like, I'm a logical guy, so I have to, say, are the white, not just conservatives, but whites in general, are they right are they telling the truth when they say that, for instance, that anything that they do, there's a bit of anything that's white is bad. So it's no problem with you having a black culture, but why can't I talk about mine? I get chided for it. And to the other side, the Lou made a good point about black culture being part of American culture. I think it's, inextricably linked. And the way it's used a lot of times by black people is to separate it from, right? It's almost the whole point of it. The reason you're celebrating and talk about it is to separate it from American culture. Like, there's American culture and then there's the black culture, right? As if it's something that's totally different, which is virtually impossible to do. And you get into these situations, like, I don't know if you saw, well, Deb Philbin got in more trouble. She was our last guest. Tiffany just retweeted, but Deb said something about the Target shirt. The Target was selling her. She was at Target, and they were telling the shirt that said "Black Joy is revolutionary," and it was a little girl modeling it, and she was having a problem with it. Oh my God! It had over 1 million views. She got death threats. I got emails because apparently she put something on her website about me, and they were like, "Hey, do you know this racist that you're talking about education or whatever?" But I had to sit back. I wouldn't reply to it because it's not worth it. But since we're talking about it, I think obviously there's a black culture. Let me say Matt Walsh was wrong before everybody gets mad at me. But I do think that there's a sense where you're like, when you say black joy, and I know what it may mean in the community, but you put it at Target now. So it's not in the black community. You're selling it in the store. So people will see it. They're going to see a phrase that says black joy is revolutionary with a little black girl in it and say, what is black joy and how is it different from white joy or any other joy? Does joy have a color? Right. And if you ask them, they'll say, well, we're saying that's specific to, and they've actually responded in the responses, saying we're talking about the fact that it's amazing that a black person can be happy and find success and find joy in a country that hates them and that's against them. And then it goes to the other side of that. Right. So for somebody to think that's an odd thing to be pushing to a 7-year-old, it's not odd to me at all to say that. But it's a death knell if you put it on Twitter. So it's kind of like, is it worth it? So on the one hand, I can't say that everything they're saying is wrong. When you think of like the Charlie Kirks and that post, and Nikki Haley, which we'll get to, Dave's a Nikki Haley supporter. And Nikki Haley said the country wasn't racist. Yes. So like Dave and I had a conversation about that. He's like, I can't believe what's wrong with my girl. Why is she teach? I said, well, technically she's right. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, no. I agree with you that she never should have tweeted it. And she never should have said it in an interview, but it's a statement of fact, right? Because then you get into, well, what about slavery? Well, everybody wasn't a slave everywhere. So are you going to say the system or are you going to say people, right? So then it gets into that. So that's why I don't really go down that path, because you're never going to win it. But I can't understand why some people will say, oh, God, I got to hear this. And then we'll get into what they teach and what they promote during Black History Month, which also causes a problem. So what are your thoughts on that? Lou, you went last, David, so I'll go to Lou first.
Yeah, for one, on that T-shirt, I wonder if it sounds like something cool to give like a goth teenager,
Well,
like,
the girl was, I have to send it to you. The girl was like 7 or 8.
7, yeah. But no, I'm just thinking like the idea like Black Joy, like a death metal band or something like that, like being revolutionary. But right. It is one of these things where I think, oh, excuse me. I think something we're finding, it's like over the over these years, it's sort of repeating the same stories, the same narratives just keep coming up, so instead of like looking at a really pretty young child with a T-shirt, it's like, what is this message, and let's unpack that message and go all the way back to the story that it's trying to tell. Mm-hmm. And I think people are exhausted from it,
But to be fair, Lou, it is trying to tell a story.
It is.
It's kind of hard to say to somebody, how dare you extrapolate that from the message that we put on the shirt that was really saying exactly what you thought the message was saying.
Yeah, and it's something too, like talking about like Black History Month, and I have to let everybody know this is also my birth month, February 26th. So thank you all for celebrating with me.
Real holiday, really.
Yeah, the real holiday, exactly.
You get to be Black that day.
Yeah, that's right. But you know, even it's like Black History Month, I have never had a problem with the idea of Black History Month. Actually, I think that again, going back, I'm like, Black history is American history.
Right.
It should be, you know, a part of, you know, more months, you know, if you will, in what we're studying. But it seems like every Black History Month, it's again like telling the same stories, using the same figures.
Right.
Like I might be the only person on record to say this, but I think MLK is way overused. We got to get some new dudes in there. Like I wish people would be instead of continuously quoting MLK, 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 like Thomas Sowell, you know, or other people, historical figures, to say like there are other historical figures, there are other stories, there are other interesting stories and incredible stories that could be told. So it's sort of like building on that as opposed to just going back to the same story over and over and over again.
Will?
I mean, so the whole Black History Month thing, first of all, I agree with that. Like last Black History Month, I was pretty lazy ass with it because I had to write my book as well. But I tried to do like a unique Black historical figure every day. So I did Tom Sowell and I did Emperor Menelik in Ethiopia, who, you know, fought and beat the Europeans. And I did, you know, do Sable and all this stuff. And a lot of people like the Bass Reeves, the guy who inspired the Lone Ranger. And I was kind of kidding around with it, but a lot of people, like teachers, started using some of the examples in their class because it is so much kind of that, you know, Martin, maybe Malcolm, Rosa Parks sat down and stood up to change the world, all that kind of thing. So yeah, you need some new Black historical figures. My thing with Black History Month in general, this gets into like a complex sort of dialogue, as much as I hate that word, that's going on right now, where there's nothing inherently wrong with the idea. Just like there's nothing wrong with St. Patrick's Day being a giant party or Women's History Month or any of that kind of thing. Because of the woke context in the USA, where everything became so annoyingly radicalized in, as I would put it, like adult upper middle class life for like 5 years, people are kind of pissed off when they see like a giant sign that says like Black Boy Joy and you're in a Dick's Sporting Goods to buy a putter. There is kind of a reaction of just shut the fuck up, will you? But I mean, I think that the backlash to that often verges on or gets into actual racism. Like where you're looking at this campaign right now where like TPUSA is saying one of our big focuses for this next year is going to be taking down Martin Luther King. We started that on King Day. We're going to accelerate that during Black History Month. I mean, I think if you want Black businessmen or any similar group, Asians, to ever come around and vote for you, like that's not the strategy to use. So I guess I find the idea itself good. I find the, you know, interpretation mildly annoying. I wouldn't respond to it as a GOP strategist by just being, you know, a mask off racist, which I think is some of what we're going to see.
Right. David, what do you think of this? Well, my concern is I actually like it. I think they're right. The problem is too much negativity. It was too much negativity before it got to the Marxism and what we call the woke today. It was just, you know, the same too. I interviewed one of my friends' daughter when she was in high school, and she went to her school and actually had them, good for her, change the curriculum because she's like, I'm tired of hearing about what she called the Fantastic Four. Right. She said, you know, she went to a majority white school. She was a sophomore. And since she was in elementary school, they just taught the same figures. I'm finding that a lot of it is negative. So you get to talk about, we went from Black History Week to Black History Month. It was supposed to celebrate, because of slavery and Jim Crow and all the bad things, it's supposed to celebrate, right? It's supposed to be a celebration of Blackness, what Black people have done, what they have overcome, and what they've accomplished, right? So anybody would hear about these people, even if you're white and you don't know anything about the history of Blacks, you would say that's a cool story, right? You can make a movie on that story. And what it became was this dripping with negativity. I got an email today saying, you know, from a company talking about it's Black History and whatever, and they were going to have these talks about institutional racism. Why is that the first thing you want to say if you want to talk about Black history? The whole point should be, you know, inventors. It should be Benjamin Banneker. It should be, you know, Robert Smalls. It should be people who did things, people who overcame things of that nature, number one. And the second thing, David, tell me if you think this is different. I also think that for the Black people who like Black history and defend it for all causes, it's interesting that they don't see both how, and I'm not knocking any culture, I love learning about other cultures, but how the equity push, a lot of them are on the side, those who aren't conservative, because there are a lot of conservatives and liberals who are pro-Black History Month who are Black, but a lot of ones who aren't conservatives are pro-Black History Month, but they're also pushing the equity uh
Mhm.
push on everything. So what happens is that's how we got the advent of every other month, right? Women's, Native American, the Hispanic American history, all these other ones. Not a knock on them, not a knock on them like a learner, but if you think about it, it's different because, like Lou said, it's so important and people miss it. Black history is equal to is American history, where the others may not. So, well, when we talk Black history during Black History Month, you talk about people, the exception of Will talking about the Ethiopian king. They're
Mhm.
talking about people who did things in America, right? But when you get to all these other months, they talk about,
Mhm.
just accomplishments of people, immigrants who came in and did things of that nature. So it's a little bit different because that's the one that's tied to the American history. So it's largely negative. It's different
Mhm.
from the others. They're trying to separate it from American history, which is a problem. And it becomes this way of, kind of like Will said, woke, this way to point out all of the shortcomings, how far we haven't gotten, right? It's not a celebration of Black life. It's look at
Mhm.
where we still aren't. Yes, we have this, but so it becomes, and then where people are not in mostly Black spaces, right? There's no explanation for, there's no rule guide for what you're supposed to do, but because the whole country's celebrating this month. What are you supposed to do if you're not Black? I guess you're supposed to just go over there and sit down and shut up and let us party or something. But like Lou said, shouldn't you be educating them and teaching them stuff beyond MLK?
Yeah, well, it's funny that you mentioned it. I think that sometimes what social media has done, it's brought everybody together, whether you rich, whether you poor, whether you in academia, whether you just a regular person. The reason why I mention that is because the average, I'm talking about the average Black person, the average, every Black day person, I believe that they look at Black History Month as a day where, we're raising awareness of what Black people have been through, how far they've come, and they more than likely they want most of their kids just to learn something good about Black history. Now, what you're talking about, you do, or you guys are pointing to that woke movement, sort of that Black academia movement, right? Where what you call it, where, like you said, they'll say, we don't have enough Black representation. Put Black joy in Target. There's not enough Black people in the boardroom. So now it's not the average Black person that's driving this conversation. The average Black person recognizes that it's Black History Month. I'll probably want my kid to learn something new in school, which will be good for him. It'll enlighten him. And this is kind of a time for me to reflect. I think the average Black person feels like that. Now, the average Black person is not driving the conversation. You got people like Joy Reid, Jamil Hill, Ibram Kendi X, Hannah Nicole Jones. Those are the people that's driving the conversation because they have the pull to say, okay, we're doing a special tonight on this network, and we're going to be talking about institutional racism for the next 29 days. So you have to look at who's driving the conversation and where they're actually going with it. So I'm not going to indict the everyday average Black person in this because the everyday average Black person just wants to, like you said, I believe on some level, just wants to celebrate and just wants their kids to learn something new. If they learn something new, then that's great. But that's not the people who are driving this conversation. So that's a whole different thing.
Right. And um, to that end, I agree with you, but I think that the breakdown is not, you know, demographically representative of the country. When you talk about everyone's on Twitter, it's true, but we skew Twitter as a whole, skews more academics, skews more corporate America, skews more celebrity and all that kind of thing, journalists. So in that sense, you're right about what the everyday Black person does and thinks. My issue is that they are not, I'm sending you all something now. They are not the bigger problem. The bigger problem, like everyday people are totally fine, but the bigger problem is what, again, academia, corporate America, and things of that nature are doing um, vis-a-vis Black History Month. So companies um, are
Right.
are making using it as a way to talk about all of these what are they calling them? These social justice issues, things of that nature.
Right.
And um
Right.
and so that's kind of the problem. So while it's true that the average person, Black person, doesn't do that and doesn't think of it as a way to push something on other people who aren't black, or to highlight these inequalities,
Right.
you would agree that not just on Twitter, outside the Twitter world, that there are corporations and people in power, government officials,
Yes.
who, with people with the bully pulpit, so to speak, doing these sorts of things, right?
Right. Well,
So how does
uh,
that change what Black History Month becomes based on that?
right. Well, as far as that, as far as you're correct in the fact that there are corporations that kind of have bowed the knee, so to speak, to DEI and these race-based agendas. The truth of the matter is this: you're correct. While regular people just want to go on about their lives, the truth is, as regular people, there's an element where we trust the experts, right? Like, for example, Will goes to college. He's looking at the data. So as a regular person, I have to trust that what he's talking about, because he is the one in position where he looks at data, he looks at facts.
Uh-oh.
So, well, just listen. A lot, a lot of these, a lot of the people in academia, especially now, not just Twitter, all social media has made it now where you can sway public opinion. So these people that, I don't want to say these people, but the activists that are in academia, they're closer to the regular person now because of social media. So they can kind of sway public opinion, which they have. So if you're a corporation, right? If you're a corporation, you may not be scared of one man. You may not be scared of Hannah Nicole Jones, but because she have a certain amount of influence, the company's thinking, well, I don't want the reputation as a company that enables institutional racism. So let me do X, Y, and Z. Even if X, Y, and Z is a virtual signal, right? It's virtual signaling, right? Like it's like something that happened, and like Netflix, I remember they said, "Oh, we're donating 500 million to HBCU." I mean, at the end of the day, you're a corporation. You could donate whenever you want, but these things do happen at a coordinated time. Now, now you know that their bottom line is the most important thing. So if virtual signaling means that they don't get the stain of enablers of racism, then that's what the corporation is going to do. Point blank and simple.
Right. But Will, I got to go to you because you always talk about this. He said that you can sway people and you can influence people and in some ways bully people. But isn't there a point when you just need to tell the truth?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a tough question if you're talking about corporate business. I mean, when it comes to the bottom line, no, I don't think we can talk about ethics later, but I don't think that there's a definite point where businesses start telling the truth. I mean, Nike is never going to say our shoes won't actually enable you to fly. Like if you're under 6'2", you're never going to make the L no matter what kind of gym shoe you wear. I mean, so no, corporations, I don't think really necessarily present that unvarnished truth very often. In fact,
Right.
the question with DEI though is that there's some hope they will, because DEI was a luxury. All this stuff that we're talking about, it was never really a bottom line service. It was just something that people decided kind of during the business boom a few years back that they could get away with, and that urge was intensified by layers of racial guilt so on down the line. I mean, are people going to start telling the truth and just saying that this stuff is worthless? I mean, I hope I'm not missing the theme here. Yeah, probably at some point, but I don't think that's inevitable. I think it's going to take a lot of pushback. And the question really, I think, is kind of what the future is going to look like here. Just actually thinking about this seriously.
Right.
So, I mean, for a long time in the USA, we had genuine old school racial conflict. You're talking about through the 60s, well into the 70s. You'd see people of another race, a fight might break out. The South, the old Confederate monuments are still very much in evidence, so on. And we followed that with kind of several decades of guilting white people about this to some extent. I mean, we've had pro minority affirmative action since 1967, so on. And now there's, after kind of the summer of George Floyd and all that, there's a considerable backlash to that. And a lot of it, like when I talked about the Martin Luther King thing, it is pretty hard body. I mean, a lot of the stuff you see on Twitter and so on is basically just racism. So the question is like, what's going to happen going forward? if companies tell the truth about Black history and Black History Month or something, like what does that mean? I guess would be my question.
Well, yeah, I don't mean to tell the truth like that. I mean, like, did you see the picture of the email I sent you?
Let me.
Because I'm like, what? I texted to you because I'm wondering
Oh,
what. I'll come back to you while you bring it up because I'm wondering what would prompt that. There's no. I get that during the summer of love, obviously it was like the painting on your window, putting up a board on your window during the riot saying "Black owned" to protect your business from the riots, right?
Oh,
It
yeah,
was,
okay.
it's, you're trying to defend yourself, but this is just, this soft pedaling, make me feel good. Send out an email on the first to say
right.
that let's celebrate Black History Month. Let's talk about institutional right. On this day, we're going to talk about part 1 and 2 because it takes a while to talk about the levels of incident. There's no educating people. There's no give of donating money, David. It's just some meetings where we can talk about how bad it is to be Black. Right.
Well, right, and I want to piggyback of something that that Will said.
Okay, then I want to get into the DEI he brought up, but go ahead.
Yeah. I was actually going to touch on that, and he mentioned something about the white backlash.
Yep.
I think what happens is, and the reason why, or like Lou said, the sensitivity level around racism is like at an all-time high, is that if you look at prior movements, whether you look at the Black Power movement, you look at the Nation of Islam, Marcus Garvey, the Moors, and the scientists, and all of these Black movements, their whole thing was, we don't trust the government, and here's what we are going to do for ourselves. We just want government to stay out of the way. If you look at Nation of Islam, they talk about building a nation within the nation. It's kind of like, if we want to get government out the way, and we'll handle our own, so to speak. Now, the movement has shifted because it's like, there's racism, right? And it's so crippling that we on our own can't do nothing about it. So here is how we need white America to act, right? Have you ever seen like a anti-racist pamphlet? It lists all of the things that white people have to do, like, oh, if you have an opportunity to give a job, and there's a white person there and there's a Black person there, you better give the Black person the job first. If there's a chance where you're in Starbucks and there's some microaggression going on and the Black person's waiting online, yeah, you let them cut in line, right? So and what happens is that in America, we're supposed to be the land of the free, right? You like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You choose what your agenda is for life. But now we have an ideology that says, if you want to clear up racism, these are the steps that white people must do. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's like an anti-racist program, and this is what you have to do to clear up racism. And the onus is all on you, right? Because if you sit through these events, right, it'll go off on, how things are still not equal, still not free. And then if you ask them for solutions, it's based on what somebody else has to do to free us.
Well, Lou, it sounds like they I don't know if they've convinced everyone, but they've convinced Mark Cuban.
Oh, Mark, yeah, Mark Cuban. Yeah. Before we talk about Mark, I wanted to bring up. I think I don't know if you guys are familiar with this particular essay, but Zora Neale Hurston wrote an article, "Why the Negro Won't Buy Communism," back in 1951, and it was really interesting. Basically, her seeing through the attempts by the Communist Party, Soviet Union, to use Black people as a way to infiltrate American society, and to basically, I mean, as she said, sort of, oh, you want us, you want to use us as pawns, put our bodies in front of, like, the bullets in order to serve your, your communist agenda. And well, she has some really fantastic lines in there. And like one of the big things she says, she's like, it's not going to work because Black people like to dress well. We like to have money in our pocket, and and it's a very like, oh shit, yeah, that's America, baby. That's capitalism. That's what we're going for.
That is
Um,
great, but some of the people in her circle succumb to it. So I don't know how I
oh, right, yeah. But one thing though, is David, brought up where you have, regular working class people, regular people looking to experts, for information. One of the great things is that, thanks to the internet, thanks to, Twitter or X, as it's known now, you get to call out a lot of these so-called experts and see,
That's true.
one of the things that Will does so well on Twitter is that he brings data. He's like, here are the fucking studies. Like, here's why what you're saying doesn't make any sense and it's bullshit. And I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle. And like, just for example, like with the Claudine Gay controversy at Harvard, I remember at one point Nicole Hannah-Jones actually saying, you know what, Claudine, you should come to Howard. You should come over here. And I don't think an offer was made, because I don't know if Howard University is willing to pay $900,000 to bring on a fucking plagiarist. Like, I don't think that's what's going to happen. So in a way, there was a market solution there. It's like, okay, Harvard, you could, you have the money to pay for this fuck up. So,
Well, what you said, so when you bringing her up made me think of something, Will. What about the piece where a lot of the pushback is, I agree with both of you, it's too far. It's pointless most of the time, even when it's not racist. Sometimes it's borderline racist. Sometimes it's blatantly racist. All that's true. But it doesn't mean, so like I said, David and I had a conversation about some of these things in the past, and I'm like, I wouldn't tweet that because I can see it's nuanced, no one's gonna get it, but you can't say it's not true, right? And so when you think about some of those things, it fascinates me. I don't really comment on it much, but I'll let the three of you comment on it. How you could openly say he brought up Claudine Gay, but you could say the same thing about Fannie Willis, is that her name? And all these other people. How you could say, or who's the other one in trouble now? Is it Cori Bush? Is she the one that's in trouble now? That they're saying that
Yeah,
she
her
spent money on
security team was like hit it up by her husband or something like
right, and she
that.
paid her money. And the first response is, you can't just attack black women. They just change the subject, say, oh, Claudine Gay. So the first thing you want to do is question the black woman. See, this is how they do us. Well, like, first of all, they hired us because they hired her. There wouldn't be a black woman in that position if they didn't hire her. So they hired her just so they honestly believe that they hire black people into positions of power and then force them out and then say, see, we tried, so now we're never going to hire a black person again. Ignoring the fact that in some of the cases they replaced them with a black person, but don't tell them that. So to that, Will, why are we even quiet about that? Not you and I, but in general, people just sit silently by while people just say, you stole money. I'm a black woman. Okay.
I mean, I think that this is something. So, like, you and I think everyone on the panel we do talk about this honestly. And I think that, again, this gets into the point of just like honest, real talk conversations and how important they are. Like, I do think that, and this goes both ways across the races, but if you look at a group of people that seem to be behaving in an unethical fashion and constantly making excuses for it, you're probably going to get kind of hostile about that.
Mhm.
So, I mean, why does that happen? First of all, it obviously does happen. I mean, we all saw this. There was an article that ran in a pretty major magazine the other day that was like Claudine Gay's defenestration, like a lot of SAT words in the title, really indicates how black women are held down and subordinated and all this other stuff. And it was nowhere in the article was it mentioned that Claudine Gay has only written 11 major academic articles and she plagiarized like 8 of them and like would have been fired permanently if she were anybody else. So obviously,
I hate to interrupt you,
what?
but for the novices, like the three of us who are, well, the two of us, not Lou, Dave and I, so they understand the context. Why is 11 not normal?
Well, I mean, like I take some heat for being more of a public intellectual guy, like writing books and so on. But I mean, I've written or co-written, I think 4 this year.
Hmm.
And that's probably about standard. Like most people write 3 or 4 articles every year, like for their
But
academic
at her
career.
level, she should have been at 30 or
Oh yeah,
40.
she should be like way better. Like she shouldn't be competing with like just decent guys at like good state universities. Yeah, she should be knocking out like 11 a year. I
Right.
mean, because you don't just have to be the author, you can be the co-author. the editor. I mean, like there are many roles you can play in that sort of journal process. So Claudine Gay total is on 11 pieces, and it turned out there's plagiarism in either 7 or 8 of those. So like that obviously at root is what she's getting in trouble for. Like
It
there's
sounds like the
no.
problem is she never should have been hired. That's the problem. I
Well,
think
yeah,
that's
but
what
I mean, so
reporters said.
they're like to get back to your first question though, like why does this happen? I think there's an old school reason. Like back in the day, blacks, whites, Indians were almost at war, and it was like federal prison. You didn't betray your group, you know. So I think in the black community, if you go to a barbershop or something, like there's always been very honest conversation,
Yep.
and people saw this with even like joking stuff like Friday, where there's that whole scene where, or barbershop actually, where there's that whole scene where the guy's like, yeah, Rosa Parks didn't do nothing but sit her ass down. And it's all these black men like laughing and making jokes and betting on the game. But that has always been kind of kept out of the view of the white middle class majority because the idea was, well, these were almost our military opponents for a while. These are the slave masters, right? So we don't want to tell them this. And I think that now that like 27% of marriages are interracial and now that black and white communities live together, that's kind of a stupid attitude because like my white buddy's reaction is like, we know. Like it's kind of dumb to deny that there's a lot of black crime in like a mixed Appalachian Hispanic black community. There's a lot of everybody crime. And like we see it when the guy's black instead of white. Like it's noticeable. They're cameras. You know, so it's just that's why it exists. But now we do have to move past it. And that's one of the moves black people can make in terms of, you know, you meet in the middle there.
Right.
Right.
Dave, I do want to get back to everyone's thoughts on Cuban. What do you think about Cuban? It's not just him having the view from me.
Right.
It's the full court, nonstop for weeks, the fight with Elon. And then when he blocked Elon, he still didn't stop. Then he had, friend of the show, the Rabbit Hole, had the back and forth nonstop. And he just kept going, kept going.
He should, yeah. I mean, he should definitely he should have ran every single one of those tweets before his, army of lawyers. Because
but the funny thing is,
like
I don't
he's
have
putting
enough of
himself in a
following,
position. Yeah.
But literally right before that woman posted that, I said, so you say, I don't use it as a factor, but I use it as a deciding decision. I said, somebody should investigate you because that's literally against the letter of the law. And then boom, EEOC, no, Mark, you can't do that. You can't even think about it. You can't mention it. You can't consider it. That's wrong. And he's like, and he kept going. Did you see after that? He still was like, well, that's just her opinion. I talked to some others. What was that about, David? How can you be that blind? I mean, some of his tweets were openly racist. They were just like, well, are you denying that blacks are different? Yeah. What? So if I got 30 black women on my company and I just want to throw in a white guy for some diversity, you would think that's okay? Well, I don't think you'd have 30 black women.
Right. Well, the interesting thing, I saw the back and forth. I really didn't comment on Mark Cuban. I didn't get involved. I don't know.
Crazy. He got crazy.
Right. I don't know if that was his opportunity at virtue signaling because it seemed like he was in a battle with Elon and he was trying to show how forward thinking he is as a CEO. And actually, and what's interesting is people called him out because he actually went against a lot of civil rights laws. He said in one of his
literally the
right,
letter of the law.
If
he's doing what he said, David, he's committing crimes. It was like
right.
He said
right. So Mark Cuban in his tweets, he said race is a factor that I use to hire. And basically every non-discrimination law in America says you cannot use race in a determining factor of how. So he basically just told on himself. So basically he said,
well, he's not doing it though, David. Let's be real. He's just bullshitting.
Right. Well, he's not the one hiring. Right. Of course. Yeah. Well, see, I'm not gonna lie. A lot of these virtual signalers, I call bullshit. Let me tell you why. And I think we all touched on this about the bottom line. They'll sit up there and they'll say, oh yeah, I hire black people. I do business with black people. We live in a capitalist society. If you ever watch Shark Tank, right? You know how many black business ideas he turned down? I mean, if you go by that standard, he should be racist, but he turned them down because they weren't good ideas, right? So a lot of these guys just say that same thing with those people. We spoke about it offline, the Young Turks. You know what I'm talking about? That crew, the Young Turks. the guy, what's his name? He
Rashard
got the
Ricky, or you talking about Chink Uyghur?
Chink.
Yeah.
Now, most people don't know this because it flew under the radar. Anybody who watched Young Turks know these guys is basically borderline socialists. They talk all that crap, and then he got exposed. Nobody knew this because it flew under the radar. He got exposed for shortchanging his employees. So it looked like he's employing a little capitalist tactics himself. So, we live in a capitalist society. So to kind of push a narrative to kind of separate yourself from that is kind of misleading because, you're saying, oh, yeah, I'm this great guy, but then you're paying minimum wage like all the other guys that you're calling out. You know what I mean? And you're taking the same shrewd business tactics that all of the racist guys you saying are using. You're using the same business tactics, but your rhetoric is saying, oh, yeah, I'm this nice guy. And to me, it's foolishness. It's stupid. It's stupid.
Yeah. So let's end on where I think this month will unfortunately go. I hope I'm wrong and the fighting stops and we talk about Biddy Mason and all these other wonderful people. But Lou, I know none of us actually watch it, but we on Twitter, we see clips. Did you see Sonny from The View?
No, I didn't see
you got to
Sonny.
go look at the Sonny Hostin clip. Sonny Hostin said that this country is larger, that most people in this country are racist. And so the other woman on the end, I guess that's the conservative. I don't watch the show. It's like, no, I think this racism, but I don't think most of the people are racist. Well, no. So she's going back. Yeah, I think most of the people. So you think most of the people. She's like, no, I think that there's some racism. I think there's a lot more than you think. And they're going back and forth. And she said, are you going to deny my truth?
No,
like, how do you deny truth?
she didn't say that. Come on.
So she put it in the wrong order. She said, are you going to deny my truth? My son walking down the beach got called the N-word multiple times. Well, first of all, I didn't know that. Secondly, like Will was saying, it didn't happen. But I don't understand how
not a fucking chance,
330 million people, the vast majority of us are racist because your very wealthy, affluent son allegedly got called the N-word a couple times on one individual beach. Not that any of us believe that it really happened. But if it did, one has nothing to do with the other. So here again, they're pushing this negative thing. And then the day before that, Whoopi had somebody on talking about Black conservatives or grifters, writing a book on the angle that Republicans are great because they used to be the true progressives. But today's Republicans are just grifters saying stuff they don't believe in order to get paid. This is the problem. Poorly done, David, again, poorly done by Charlie, TPUSA, poorly done by Matt Walsh. But this is the reason why these people are like, oh, I'm so tired of this BS. If it wasn't so divisive, so in your face, so whitey sucks, so everybody's racist, maybe people would at the very least be quiet. Go ahead, Will.
One very quick comment. I don't want to jump in on it, but I think that's true for like Matt and maybe Charlie, just like normal guys that happen to be on the right. But I mean, I do think there's an element of silliness to thinking that racism in the USA, and I don't think you think this, but is a backlash to like wokeness since 1974. Like people will often say this on social media, like, yeah, if it hadn't been for that Barack Obama, we wouldn't have all these tensions. And it's like, it's not really true. Like if you poll Americans, like we're talking about the data, you see some crazy stuff. Like today I found out that 40% of Americans aren't just Christians, which is great, but young earth creationists who think the planet is 5,000 years old. No offense if anybody does, but like people had whole explanations for this. Like, on the first day, they made the air, the second was the fish. And there are similar attitudes toward race among older white and Black Americans. You now have like the dissonant right among younger kids. So, I mean, I think some people are just bigots. And it's kind of hard to know your audience. Like when you get into some of these Twitter and Facebook debates about topics like race and IQ, there are different groups. Like there are people that are tired of wokeness, which may even be the largest. And then there are people that just genuinely have like amoral, interesting ideas. Like whatever, I'm going to say this, eugenics, like that's, and you have like journals like Aporia that have a lot of these like crazy, what could science do ideas. But then you have people that actually just like genuinely don't like Black people, or on our side, sometimes whites. Like it's no coincidence that like the whole race and IQ thing focuses on Black Americans and not like Hispanics who are mostly Caucasian and have exactly the same test scores. Like there obviously are just people in every group that are bigots. And like if you start pitching a message like fuck Martin Luther King, you're gonna get Um, hopefully no one's gonna clip that like racist pundit Riley.
Right.
No,
Yeah,
so no, they're gonna
please.
put your words out of my mouth. So like
There you
Yeah,
go.
oh yeah, they're gonna do
Wilfred.
it like the one but partly Caucasian guy on the show. Like, yeah. But I mean, even me, I think they'll like lighten me. I
yeah,
had that happen on a
yeah.
left-wing podcast once. Anyway, like, I mean, I think that just basically is what it is. Like, if your message is like screw MLK, you're gonna get, in addition to a lot of people that are just sick of the BS, like those residual racists that are out there, 8% of the full population or whatever, are gonna really glom onto that.
Well, no, I agree.
Well,
I don't think I agree with you that I don't think it's a backlash happening because of. I think people are more vocal because of that when we're talking about social media. But you already know I don't think social media are real, and I don't think I think that you're polling when you look at not when you look at stats that are you actually do data and do research on groups, but when you look at like Twitter polls, you poll in such a skewed group of people that it kind of changes that. Go ahead, Lou.
Charles, yeah, I haven't again, I haven't seen the clip, but you know the story that she told about her son, you know, being called the N-word, and it's I saw like a kind of like a similar example with Ta-Nehisi Coates in one of his books. I think one letter to his son. He
Yeah.
tells like this story about he was going to the movies with his son, and on the escalator there was a very rude white woman there,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, he sort of went inside the head of this white woman and expressed what the thoughts that she had, which the only way to for him to do that is to be a clairvoyant. But ultimately, as a writer, he invented whatever the hell was in this woman's head. And when I read that little vignette, I was thinking like, oh, I don't know if that woman was racist. She might just be a cunt because you're in New York City, you're gonna often run into terrible people. But it's like taking that incident and then saying racism. It's a similar thing here. Like if her son was called the N-word, I think that's terrible. But we see what happens to people who use the N-word in public, especially if they're filmed.
Right.
Their fucking life is ruined.
Right. And the
And
fact that it happened multiple times on that beach.
right, but we see as a society how we handle those cases for the most part, and
right.
I think it says a lot too that over the years more Americans are comfortable with interracial marriage than they are with like interpolitical marriage. There are people who like, oh, I'm fine with my daughter marrying a black guy as long as he's not a Republican. Like they're like the idea that it's like, whoa, where are we? But that's where we are now. We've come that
Right.
far.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as far as this racist thing, it's funny because as a black conservative, and I think we spoke about this off camera, they love to ask black conservatives, well, do you think it's racism? And like I've told you offline, I try to follow the facts. We know that, as Will said, racism and bigotry and prejudice did exist, right? Slavery is a real thing. Redlining was a real historical fact. Jim Crow and the Black Codes and all of these things were historical fact. My whole thing with the whole racism, and not that racism didn't exist, obviously it did. We can't come to a consensus on how much it impacts Black people now. Like, how much does it really impact Black people now? Now, I'm not gonna sit up here and say, racism has zero effect on anybody, because obviously racism does. But how much of an impact does it really have? Because there's all this disparities, and they're saying that it's drastically different for Black and white. But when you look at certain demographics, like for example, I think we spoke about this offline. When you look at upper class Blacks, like Obama or a Magic Johnson, right, or anything like that, how likely is it that their kids are going to be poor? Well, not really likely, because they have the resources to keep backing them until they get where they need to go. And there was a study that I read about childhood success, and they said that bigger than racism, the two biggest predictors of childhood success is the family structure and the parents' social economic status, right? Because if a kid comes to you, he says, hey, I want to do coding, but the program is $20,000 so I can get the certificate. Well, if I make $190,000, I just give you the money and I keep feeding my kids until they're successful. That's what any parent would do, whether they're Black or white. So, and it's the same thing with Obama's kids. Like if Obama's kids grow up and do something great, are we really shocked that they're the head of this? No, because you could look at the social economic status of their parents tells you that they're going to keep feeding that situation until they become successful. Whereas it not even, I even take black people out of it. If you're a lower class white person, right, and you're in one of these rural areas where fentanyl and opioid crisis abound, I mean, is it shocking that a lot of these white kids in those areas fall into fentanyl and other stuff? No, because they're in a social economic class where I don't want to say that's what's waiting for them, but you know, it's a likeliness that X, Y, and Z will happen, regardless if you are black or white. So we have to assess, not that there's no racism in society, but we have to have an honest conversation about how much is actually affecting us. Not that there's no racism, because like Will said, there's bigots in all types. There's bigot CEOs, there's bigot hiring managers, there's bigot everything. But how much is it affecting black people now? So that's the real discussion that needs to happen.
Okay, and I guess we get the last word to the guy whose birthday is this month, so he has one day that he's black. Lou Perez.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you when I first came on this program, I thought Henry Louis Gates was going to pop out and let us all know that somehow
track your roots.
Yeah, that somehow my family owned all of you guys.
All of us.
So that's what
not even our ancestors, us.
Us right now. No, man, I appreciate coming on as every appearance. Really enjoyed it, and yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what other stuff comes up this month for sure as we get closer and closer to me becoming 42 years old. So,
oh, you're old. That's good.
Yeah, man.
Well, I just hope that we stop. We're not going to stop the fight. That's on Twitter, but at some point, move away from that and start teaching Black history in a proper way. Florida took all that heat about you don't care, you want to erase Black history, when really it was the most robust Black history curriculum in the country, but nobody actually looked at it. It was 210 pages. Nobody was ever even going to teach it. It was too long. But I just think you don't isolate it. I don't want my history to be at the outhouse. I don't want to teach American history and then go out back to teach the Black history. Bring it in the main house. Make it put it on the walls next to Thomas Jefferson. Make it all American history. Teach it all the time. And then it won't see. I think it'll be better for everybody. So people will learn more than just those Fantastic Four that my friend's daughter mentioned. But also people will be less, angry about it because it won't feel like it's some force. Look at the oppression you've caused kind of thing. It's just a celebration of Blackness and a celebration of America. So I'm thinking that's the best way that we can go about it. Anything you want to add, Will? I don't want to leave you ignored or anything. You're on mute.
No, not really. I think your last line was good. To some extent, we're just going to have to look, and this is totally cliche, but we're just going to have to look and see what the future brings. Like right now, there is a huge amount of racial tension caused by the reaction to the overemphasis on ethnicity and race for, a decade now?
Right.
So, I mean, hopefully we'll be able to progress back through that and get to you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Circle of life, and get back to things like the ethnic days and so on being healthy occasional holidays that the government doesn't necessarily need to post everywhere. That would be my goal.
Well, I guess the last thing I will say then, based on what you said, is that in a weird way, we got what we wanted, right? We thought that the best way to racism had decreased a lot, but it wasn't right where we wanted it to be. And the best way to finish closing it was to focus on race all the time. And here, this is what you get. So now we're focusing on race all the time. So I guess you should.
Racism's going back up.
Yeah, get in it, swim in it, get used to it. And when you realize it's bad, maybe you'll go back to reality. Maybe it's a good thing and it'll help people understand that maybe talking about race all the time is not the best way to go. Well, Lou and David, thank you for joining us. And thank you all for listening and watching. From you commies who know you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.